of the media. Welcome to this, our Friday, 3rd of May press conference. Today we'll be dealing with the Oliver Tambo Award for the late President of Guyana, Mr. LFS Burnham. The panel for today's press conference is to my extreme left, Mr. Robert Corbin, the previous leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. David Granger to his right, who is the current leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. Ronald Austin, who I believe needs no real introduction to the media, myself. The press statement will be read by Mr. Austin, and thereafter we will follow the usual rules for you to ask questions using the microphone and stating your name and the entity you represent. Okay? I'll ask Mr. Austin to read the press statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leader of the People's National Congress, former leader of the People's National Congress, and members of the press, my fellow sufferers in the Third Estate. On the 12th March 2013, the Chancellor of the Orders of the South African Government, Mr. R. Cassius Lubisi, PhD, by way of a letter, informed Ms. Roxanne Burnham Charles, the daughter of the late President Forbes Burnham, that the South African government had decided to confer the O.R. Tambo Award on him, and I quote, for his integral part in sport boycott against South Africa during the apartheid regime and support for liberation movement and freedom fighters in South Africa. The government in Pretoria also gave notice that the award ceremony would take place on the 27th of April. Your copy reads incorrectly, 27th of May. That should be corrected to the 27th of April, 2013. As a result of the information contained in that letter, the members of the Burnham family took active measures to journey to South Africa to receive the award. As shall be related, these preparations had to be temporarily cancelled. The People's National Congress, as you would expect, was pleased with the decision of the South African government, even though it came 28 years after Mr. Burnham's death, and when it had been clearly established that he had played a significant political and diplomatic role in the liberation of Southern Africa, including South Africa itself. However, this sense of achievement was short-lived. The South African High Commission in Ottawa subsequently informed Ms. Van West Charles that Pretoria, that is the government of South Africa, had decided, and I quote again, to defer the posthumous awarding of the Order of Companions of O.R. Tambo indefinitely. This is where the matter stands or should stand at the moment, although it has appeared in the media, especially in the blogosphere, that the award has been rescinded. I wish to state here, in my own right and as a member of this panel, that the People's National Congress Reform has not been informed, neither is it aware that such a decision has been taken to rescind the conferment of the award on Mr. Burnham. I don't know where that idea took root, but it seems to be quite popular in the blogosphere and in the press. The PNC respects the PNCR respects the sovereign decision of the South African government. However, it is difficult to think of any plausible or justifiable reason for deferring the conferment of this award. The party is convinced that Mr. Burnham richly deserves such an honor. He threw the full weight of his party and government behind his support of the liberation fighters in Southern Africa politically and diplomatically. And this is so well rehearsed in terms of the detail of his contribution that I need not emphasize it here. Moreover, he helped to change the strategic equation in Southern Africa by allowing Cuban troops to transit through this country to rout the forces of reaction during the Angolan Civil War. And this made a major change in the equation in Southern Africa, leading to the liberation of Namibia and then subsequently to South Africa itself. And in the case of South Africa itself, Ghana was a leading voice and participants in the sports boycott against the apartheid regime. This again is something so well known that we need not give it much emphasis or detail here. As a matter of policy, Mr. Burnham placed emphasis on the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, knowing fully well that this would have a transformational effect on the freedom of South Africa. And this was proved handsomely, I think, in February of 1991. Speculation on the reasons for the deferment of the award has centered primarily on a petition which has been circulated in the media and an article written by Professor Horace Campbell in which various allegations have been made against Mr. Burnham. Having seen the petition and the article, the PNCR has concluded that these fulminations, and that is what they are not of sufficient weight to overturn the decision of the government of South Africa. The PNCR is therefore awaiting a final decision from the government of South Africa. The party is confident that the government of South Africa will stand by its initial sovereign decision to confer the Order of Companions of O.R. Tambo on the founding leader of the People's National Congress. I thank you very much.
Okay. Gentlemen, please feel free to raise your questions and use the microphone to do so.
Adolphus, Capital News. There's a notion, you mentioned some allegations for the rescinding or the apparent the putting back of the award, but there is an allegation relating to Mr. Burnham's allegedly involvement in the assassination of Walter Rodney. What is the party's response to that? And locally, though, there is a notion that the People Progressive Party Civic Freedom House is behind the behind this rescinding or the apparent pullback, or that they want to rewrite the history of Ghana. What is the party response to those two charges?
I can start. As far as the Rodney matter is concerned, there have been allegations for over 3 decades, and there was a great demand on the part of some of the persons making the allegations that Gregory Smith, non-commissioned officer of the Guyana Defense Force, was involved, and that he should be extradited from Guyana, KN, to face charges. In fact, the man has died, and he did write a book called The Assassination Cry of a Failed Revolution, and he made certain allegations in it. All of the information, as far as I'm concerned, was authentic, his photographs. It was almost his life story. And there was no allegation against Forbes Burnham in that book, and that he was meant to be the star witness. And if that is the evidence, if that's the testimony of the star witness that the people who made the allegations want to go by, it is there for all to see. And we, on the part of the People's National Congress Reform, as you know, Mr. Forbes Burnham, as president of the country, did ensure that forensic surgeons were brought into the country and to examine the body, the cadaver of Walter Rodney. There was an inquiry. Mr. Hoyt, I think, convened another judicial inquiry, or at least an inquest. And the People's National Congress Reform has done everything legally possible, everything humanly possible to refute the allegations made against members of our party for involvement in that matter. And if people took the trouble to read the testimony of Gregory Smith, they will see where the blame lies. And we certainly do not accept it, and we've always held out that we are prepared to have any inquiry, to give evidence in any forum to disprove the allegations against the PNCR. We were not involved in the death of Rodney, and I think people close to Rodney know very well what he was up to and who's responsible for his death. So that matter is not something that bothers us, because we are not afraid of the truth, and we have done everything that is humanly possible to disprove the allegations. As far as the second matter is concerned, I don't know what goes on in the PPPC. I cannot speak for them. I don't know if they're behind it. As far as I know, one, Mr. Horace Campbell, was the initiator of some letter and some petition, and I do not know if that is the only motivating factor in the decision of the sovereign government of the Republic of South Africa to take the action that it took. So I can't say anything further than that second part of that question. I don't know if Mr. Robert Corbin would like to comment on the two allegations.
No. I think sufficient has been said. But I think it's an insult to the contribution of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham to drag his name into a controversy at a time like this on issues that have been ventilated here locally for decades, when his contribution to the liberation struggle of Southern Africa is beyond dispute. He led the way in the Caribbean. He led the way almost in the third world. I was present in Lusaka in 1970 as a young man at the Non-Aligned Conference in 1970, when he made a contribution public of $50,000 per year to the liberation struggle. And when we came back to Guyana after an East African tour, we were greeted by criticisms from Dr. Chetty Jagan and the PPP, who said we were wasting money on taxpayers' money in that direction. And if I might digress, I thought it was an insult to even Burnham that others from Guyana received that award before him. And, but I don't want to comment further on that, except to say that to attempt to take away from the contribution of Forbes Burnham to the liberation struggle by raising a number of red herrings is, I think, doing a great disservice to his contribution in that regard. When Forbes Burnham took the decision to allow Cuban planes to land here, he was risking the wrath of the whole Western area, particularly the American government, to have allowed Cuban planes to land here. And I can say, since the statute of all these things limitations passed, Forbes Burnham facilitated the struggle of many of those countries, including providing safe passage for many of the liberation fighters around the world. Many of them carried my home address on their passports. I was the contact who processed many of those liberation fighters. Some of them came here, some resided at my home temporarily while we processed their passports so they could have had safe passage around in order to carry out the struggle. So when we talk about the liberation struggle and the contribution of Forbes Burnham, I'm speaking at first hand to have been involved in what he has done. At a time when he faced the wrath of the Western Hemisphere and the West. And I think that it is an insult to raise a number of red herrings at a time like this, when Guyana as a country, not only the PNC, Guyana as a country should be proud of the role it played in contributing to the liberation of Southern Africa, and it shouldn't be a partisan matter, because Burnham was acting as president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and putting the country's position on line on where it stood in the relation to international affairs, and particularly the issue of Southern Africa.
Gordon Mosley, News Source. Gentlemen, do you think the party needs to do more to inform and educate today's generation about the contributions of former presidents and former leaders of the party? A lot of young people, they hear of Forbes Burnham and they think of restrictions of flour, and they do not know a lot of the contributions he would have made, a lot of the contributions Mr. Hoyt would have made. So do you think the party now, more than ever, needs to pay attention to the history of its leaders and to set the record straight in many respects?
Well, we can always do more. We have done a lot, and as far as this particular issue is concerned, I would like the media to know that it is not something that arose in 2013. It is a matter that had been discussed and acted on over a period of 8 years from 2005. And it has only now come to this point. we operated on the assumption that the Republic of South Africa all the time was doing due diligence and investigating the recommendations which were made, because they've really had 8 years, had it on the desk for 8 years. But coming back directly to your question, we do have a substantial corpus of works, and there are at least 3 distinct publications which came out between 1980 and 1982 about Guyana's contribution to the struggle for the liberation of Southern Africa. These are booklets, and perhaps we can reprint those booklets, but there has been substantial work. There was a Guyana Committee for Solidarity and Peace, and the work is documented by Dr. Tyrone Ferguson in his stellar work on the Burnham period in government. And in fact, Mr. Burnham, if you check the Hansard of the National Assembly from 1960, this is what, 53 years ago, Mr. Burnham was making contributions about the situation in Nyasaland, which is now Malawi, and he'd been speaking out for, against the Sharpeville massacre, which took place in South Africa. He has been consistent, and in fact, even if you look at his life story, from the time he went up to London, he kept the company of people like Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who became Prime Minister of Nigeria, Seretse Khama, who became Prime Minister of Botswana, Kwame Nkrumah, who became President of Ghana, and his work from the 1940s up to the time of his death in 1985, as Comrade Corbin said, is without equal in the English-speaking Caribbean. So there is a substantial amount of information for people who care to read, who care to see, and perhaps, as you said, we can always do more. But the stuff is there, the information is there, the printed material is there, and perhaps we can take the trouble to reprint it and let people know what is taking place. But as Comrade Corbin has been pointing out, there is a substantial body of evidence. Number one, as was pointed out here, we took a position about the sport boycott, particularly in cricket, at great expense because matches coming to Guyana were cancelled. But we led the Commonwealth in bringing about what is called the Gleneagles Agreement. And many top West Indian players and even British players couldn't enter Guyana, including Garfield Sobers, our own Alvin Kalicharan. These people were severely punished, but they had the effect of isolating South Africa and bringing about the downfall of the apartheid system. Several of the liberation fighters came to Guyana, as Comrade Corbin has pointed out. This country, Guyana, facilitated the movement of liberation fighters around the world because they could not get passports in the country of their birth. We named the Mandela Avenue after the great South African freedom fighter. We built a liberation monument which stands outside of the Umanayana to commemorate the South African struggle for liberation. We provided scholarships. We provided scholarships to students of these countries which were still under the colonial yoke: Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, and Zambia. Well, in fact, at the time of Zambian independence, the British were so cruel. Zambia used to be known as Northern Rhodesia. It was part of what is called the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. And Zambia was Northern Rhodesia. What is now Zimbabwe was Southern Rhodesia. And Nyasaland has become Malawi. But we were able to provide civil servants, typists. Scores of ordinary people went to work in Zambia because the British had kept that country so depressed. As you know, next to South Africa, Rhodesia was probably the most divided colony in terms of the apartheid system. So when the British pulled out, we had to send ordinary civil servants to help there. Several of the liberation fighters, I said, including Oliver Tambo, came to this country. Sam Nujoma came to this country and were entertained and feted by our political leaders. As Comrade Austin pointed out, from 1970, when our founder leader, Forbes Burnham, went to his first non-aligned movement meeting in Lusaka in September 1970, we donated money, hard cash, which we could not afford. But our founder leader felt that, if freedom is taken away from people on one continent, it's freedom taken away from people all around the world. And we made a sacrifice. So we paid blood, we paid money for the liberation of Southern Africa. And that is why we are so firm today in ensuring not only that the name of the founder leader is cleared, but the reputation of our country as being in the forefront of the liberation struggle is not impugned any longer.
Sir, do you intend to write the South African government or the Chancellor of Orders in the South African government
yes,
on this issue?
we did have a coordinating meeting, and that decision was taken, and that is being done.
Do you intend to ask the Guyana government, since this is now a Guyana issue, to also follow that lead?
We will inform them of what we're doing, but I think the Guyana government has been very remarkable for its silence so far. Although the person involved is a distinguished citizen of this country, one of the expected the government to come forward and take a position. It's a Guyanese citizen, a distinguished Guyanese citizen.
I just wanted to find out the role. What was your role in the cabinet at that time when this was speaking?
I was leader of the youth movement of the party at that time, the YSM. And the YSM was in the forefront of organizing educational programs throughout this country and letting young people know what was taking place in Southern Africa. We even had volunteers who volunteered to go and fight in not only South Africa and Angola and all those places, but they said they didn't need bodies, they had people. What they needed was material assistance. And we were in the forefront of mobilizing material assistance even before the government of Guyana, through its president, decided to give financial assistance from the state. But the party itself was providing a lot of assistance to the South African freedom, the African freedom fighters was in Southern Africa. And I was part of the coordinating team. And as I said, I accompanied Forrest Burnham to the first online conference in 1970. And thereafter, I sort of was the focal point for some of those activities, some of which had to be kept very, very confidential until now, as I said, we can speak freely of them.
I must point out to add, although we are focusing on South Africa today, in the 1970s, there were several African countries which had not yet gained their freedom. The Portuguese were the first to go into, the first imperial power to go into Africa in the 15th century, and they were the last imperial power to leave. So there are places like Guinea-Bissau, which was Portuguese, Mozambique was Portuguese, Angola was Portuguese, São Tomé was Portuguese. So Guyana supported liberation struggles not only in Southern Africa, but throughout Africa. There was also Sahara, I think, and Mauritania. I think these countries were not free at the time. So our vision, or the breadth of Guyana's foreign policy, was wider than just what is now called South Africa.
Okay. If you have no further questions, let me thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you at our next press conference.